Some of my early engraving done over 40 years ago, where I used a running wheat border on this well-worn brass buckle. And a beautiful example on a buckle by my teacher Linton McKenzie. I begin by using one leg of my dividers to follow the edge and the other to scribe a line on my practice plate. Then I set my dividers to 3 millimeters past my first line and scribe my second line, so my two lines will be exactly 3 millimeters apart. When cutting the borders, I cut to the inside of my scribed lines. This enables me to cut very accurate and straight lines. If I cut on the line, I obliterate the line as I cut, and my graver could drift to the left or the right because I have no line to follow. This mostly applies to scribed lines and not to wide, sketchy pencil layouts, which are far more forgiving and normally cut directly on the line. Just as a reminder, please keep a very sharp eye on the condition of your graver. Periodically give it a very close inspection at high magnification to be sure it's in pristine condition. If it's not, resharpen. If you're unsure, resharpen. Straight lines are very unforgiving. They're either straight or they're not, and a dull or chipped graver will make it difficult or impossible to get satisfactory results. I've turned my plate around and am now cutting to the inside of the second line. By cutting each line to the inside, I will not exceed the 3 millimeter size I want. In actual work, this isn't so important because you'll be engraving this border anywhere from 1 millimeter to 4 millimeters wide. But when teaching, I want the student's work to be the same dimensions as the teacher's for comparison purposes. I should also add that the running wheat border looks better when it's smaller. Anything larger than 3 or 4 millimeters can look awkward unless it's on a very large object like a motorcycle part. I set my dividers to 5 millimeters and make light marks between the two borders. Some transfer wax applied to the surface provides a waxy film that I can mark through with my pencil. I've been using transfer wax for decades, and there are other methods as well, such as Chinese white paint. At each mark I draw a horizontal ladder rung. I also keep my 9H pencil sharpened to a needle point. A dull pencil makes a wide, blurry line. Some engravers are okay with that, but I prefer sharp, accurate layouts. Oftentimes I turn off my microscope ring light and use a task light positioned behind my scope and just above my vise. This side light can make pencil marks much easier to see. A boat shape is drawn in each of the rectangles. Make sure it's a nice curved boat and not straight lines. The boat merges with the border at about the halfway point in the rectangle. Cut the entire right side first, starting the cut inside the border and rolling the graver a slight amount toward the inside of the boat. Starting inside the border will produce a smooth transition like an exit off of an interstate. So put the graver in the border, start your cut, and transition out of the border to make the curved and beveled cut. By cutting all of one side first, then the opposite side, helps maintain consistency of cutting. Each side of the boat gets 3 notches, one close to the top, one in the middle, and the bottom one is about even with the previous boat tip. The notches are angled at roughly 45 degrees. Strive for symmetry when marking the notches. It's easy to make an error here, so mark carefully. Another reminder to keep your pencil sharp. Wide, blurry pencil marks often results in having to guess or estimate where to place the graver. The notch should be a short, wide, triangular shark's tooth. It's made by tilting the graver slightly to the left and making a plunge cut into the metal, releasing the burr as it intersects the boat cut. If you've cut the boats deep enough, the burr will release cleanly. If the boat cuts are too shallow, the burr will be difficult to break free because intersecting a thin line with a heavy cut results in a burr that requires considerable effort to remove. Be careful when cutting the bottom notch, which is next to the border, as the graver's cutting edge overhangs the border, and a miscalculation may damage the metal outside the border. This makes for a difficult cleanup. All cuts work in harmony. When the borders and boats are of sufficient depth, then the notches and the shading will be a joy to cut. If they're not deep enough, the result can be lots of burrs, which are difficult to remove. This comes with practice and experience, and it will come to you as well. We have a strong side and a weak side. The left side notches feel very natural to me to cut. The ones on the right side feel awkward and unnatural, even after decades of cutting this border. I do my best to make them look identical to the previous side, but oftentimes I fall short. If one side feels easier to you than the other, you are not alone. The final step is shading, and I start with the center line. The cut begins close to the top of the leaf and gets progressively wider as it approaches the leaf below. My boats are cut deep enough that the chips release without much trouble. Care should be taken as your shading cut approaches the boat. When it breaks through, there will be no resistance to the graver and it can surge forward and into your beveled boat cut. So take it slowly and carefully to prevent damage. But it happens to all of us, and when it happens to you, you may have to recut a boat in order to remove the slip. Your final lines can cut through the last notch. The shading lines begin with a scoot of the graver's heel onto the metal for a millimeter or so. Then the graver enters the metal and produces a chip curl. The first micro-thin taper is extremely important. Entering the metal too quickly will not produce the long taper we're looking for. As the lines progress, they become wider and overlap or converge. Where the lines overlap, there's no white space between them, so it creates a very dark shade. When done correctly, each leaf will shade from white to gray to black. I blackened the border with Rust-Oleum flat black paint, which adds contrast and shows detail. When viewed at an angle, the edges of the beveled cuts really give the border a rich, three-dimensional appearance. The running wheat border is one of the most versatile border decorations and is a great skill builder.